Hello and welcome to this Marketing and Communications Watch, brought to you by the Conference Board. Today we'll talk about how to use corporate venturing to innovate, the Procter & Gamble way. My name is Chiqui Cartagena, and I'm the CMO of the Conference Board, and also the leader of our Marketing and Communications Center. Joining me today for this conversation are Janet Ho, one of our senior economists, and Debbie Kuline, who is the principal at Uber Brands Consulting, teaches marketing at Columbia University, and we're so lucky to have him also be our leader of the Marketing Institute here at the Conference Board. JP also happened to work for a long time at P&G, but our special guest today is the expert from P&G, who will share their approach to innovation through venturing today. It's an honor to welcome Chetan Parekh, who is the Senior Brand Director and Innovation Portfolio Leader at P&G Venture Studio in Cincinnati. Hello, Chetan. Welcome to our webcast. Are you in Cincinnati right now?
I am, absolutely.
Oh, wow, that's great. Well, Chetan has spent some 15 years at P&G honing his marketing and management skills and is now in a pioneering role leading the thinking at P&G Venture Studios on identifying and incubating new businesses by building innovative partnerships with startups, which of course is exactly what we want to focus on today. And Chetan, we'll get back to you in just a second, but I first want to tune to our audience and say, please, we want you to participate in this conversation. So send me some questions so I can get them to Chetan, and make sure he answers them if he can. But before we get started, just a quick reminder that you can earn continued education credits by participating in this live webcast today. To do so, you must click on the pop-up boxes that will appear throughout this webcast. And with all that housekeeping behind us, I want to turn this over to my good friend JP. JP, where are you? That looks beautiful.
I'm at home. No, I wish. I'm actually on my way from New York to Boston, so I stopped over in beautiful Connecticut for this webcast here. And found a special spot that has Wi-Fi in the open, imagine. Chetan, thanks for being here. We're both P&G veterans, and you are a veteran, and at the same time you work in this very new kind of exciting role. Can you explain to us a little bit, what makes you a veteran and what is helpful in that, and what's brand new and you're learning yourself in what you're doing now?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, JP. It's been many years since we connected, so it's always good. So P&G and what makes for like a classic P&G. I think the way in which I'd like to respond to that is really, to me, it's all about sense making. And you touched upon the whole idea of a veteran, which is very generous of you. But it's really about as you know, at P&G, specifically within marketing, we rotate through a whole bunch of different roles, varying levels of complexity, upstream and downstream, and through all of that, in a very intentional way, what you're actually doing is you're building different mental models, right? You're building mental models for how to run end-to-end business. What are the business levers and what are the right questions to ask? You are learning about the organization, how to create teams and how to mobilize a complex organization behind a problem. And then you're learning about yourself, right? What your strengths are and what are some of the things that you need to learn on your own personal growth journey. So you put all of that together. And to me, this is kind of where it becomes very interesting because it allows you to start distilling marketing down to what I call as some of the first principles, right? And I think it's the consistency of executing on some of those foundational principles that really compounds over time. And it allows us really to make sense of the crazy world that's changing around us at all times, right? So, new technologies are coming and marketing is changing, all of those things happening. How do you make sense of all of that? And how do you stay grounded? And I think that's the benefit of having spent a little bit of time at P&G because you've been through those experiences and you've understood the need, for example, to put consumer at the center of everything, right? So that the how might change, how you talk to the consumer might change or the customer might change, but fundamentally the ability to get to the bottom of the consumer pain point. How do you articulate the value proposition? How do you build superior, how do you resolve basically the consumer tensions via superior offerings? Some of those things don't change. And I think that really has formed the bedrock or the foundation of the work and the experience that people like me, along with the rest of us at P&G Ventures, that bring to this very different way of looking at things. So very quickly, P&G Ventures.
Because I was going to say, this sounds wonderful. It's the rational, strategic approach. I mean, reality is P&G is not famous for fast innovation, for venturing. On the contrary, it's famous for being very reliable, like an oil tanker, for believing that brands live forever and not following fads. So how does this hot world of venturing fit in there? How did it even get started? Why are you doing it?
Yeah, so I think I think the heart of that question goes to what is P&G Ventures and why do we exist? And the reason why we exist is really to create brands, billion-dollar brands in new categories for P&G. And that sets the context, is new categories. So to your point, we obviously have amazing categories and products that we operate in. And those have their own understanding of the consumers and the technologies and the innovation pipeline that's associated with it. Our remit is new categories. So this is really positioning the company 5 to 10 years out to say, where is the consumption going? Where is the consumer going? Where are some of the trends that are emerging in terms of how consumers want to consume in the coming decades is going? How do you get on top of that? How do we as a company start thinking about some of those businesses and create small experiments by partnering externally? And I think to your point of the hot world of venturing, it's really a venture studio, right? So I think we are very clear, and I can reference you to our website in terms of the areas that we are interested in. And within those areas, we are open to hearing more ideas because, again, these are not the categories that we currently compete in. And we also know that us, P&G as a company, brings amazing assets to the table, right? So how do you combine? It turns into this combining the best of both worlds. And through that process, hopefully we can create a new model of giving birth to new brands, which is really ultimately the objective. And it's a learning journey, to your point. It's a big organization, has 183 years of history behind it. And there are ways, and therefore there's an organizational DNA that we need to figure out how to leverage the right way. And very quickly on that, kind of the framework that we internally use is around what are some of the things that we want to forget about the mothership, right? Very intentionally. What are some of the things that we want to borrow? Again, the resources that we bring to table, startups would die for having some of those resources, right? So how do we strategically borrow some of those resources and bring it into the fold to really make it part of our overall value proposition? And the third one is all around learning. We are learning how to operate in this new world. And from that perspective, really at the bleeding edge of, teaching ourselves and therefore the company on how to operate in this new world.
Excellent. Chiki, I know you're burning to ask a question.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Chetan, you mentioned consumers are changing and that you're looking for new areas to develop. But I wonder if in your research, right, as we become a more multicultural country, are some of your core products also going to need to change and need some relooking at that?
Absolutely.
Is that part of your remit as well?
It's not. So, I think it's, but first of all, you're exactly right. Obviously how consumers want to consume and their perception on even things like hair care, for example, or beauty or baby care, many of the big categories that we operate in, that's obviously changing. And the pulse of what's happening there and what to do about it really resides within the business units. We are purely looking, so let me give you an example of an area, right, and a macro shift, for example, where somebody like P&G Ventures would be the best to actually execute against. The world is aging, everyone is living longer, and therefore thinking about as you age, what are some of your needs in the context of your own home and what to do about it turns into a very exciting area. Now, arguably, some of that does fall into, our home care business units and fabric care business units, and it's this complex Venn diagram, and it falls at the intersection of many of those existing areas. And that actually is a perfect place for somebody like P&G Ventures to execute on those areas, to put small bets into place to see if it can turn into interesting propositions, which at some point in time, if it makes sense to fold it within an existing business unit, wouldn't that be a great problem to have, right? But at the same time, some of those ideas that are at the edge might not be the right ones for the business units to execute, who have their own pipeline and they are focused on executing against that. So again, it's a very complementary story between what we bring to the table and what the business units bring to the table.
Excellent. All right. Well, Janet, I know you've done research in this area. It's a wonderful pitch, the best of both worlds, tradition and you exploring new areas, etc. According to what you've studied, does it work out that way? What are the best-in-class kind of ways to innovate through venturing? Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe ask Chetan the pertinent question?
Thank you, JP. What I learned is that when companies carry out venture capital style innovation, especially for a traditional company like a P&G, that innovation may disrupt the core business. So the company would have to know, how do I do something that's for 3 and 5 years ahead, but is still compatible with our business units? So my question with Chetan is that, how does P&G protect its core business from this potential disruption from this 3 to 5 year ahead new business?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We actually spend a lot of time thinking about that, Jen. So I think, again, trying to create that separation between what the business units work on and what the ventures team works on to prevent crosshairs, right? And that's somewhat where some of this tension comes into play. It is creating, for example, the next S-curve in the world of beauty, for example, sits within beauty care. Right, versus P&G Ventures, for example, looking at the world of aging adults, or looking at male wellness, or looking at women's wellness as holistic areas, and giving ourselves the permission to take the category blinders off, or not blinders, but guardrails off, right? So, for example, in the world of aging, if you look at aging from the perspective of fabric care and the Tide business that we have, I think, again, you can create some really interesting innovations around, the size and the handle and the packaging and many other things. But that would be in the context of fabric care. That would not allow you to truly penetrate what are some of the big pain points that adults have as they age, right? And that's something that a unit like Ventures would be tasked with to try and figure that out. So hopefully that helps answer some of those questions.
I can still imagine that there's going to be some fight.
By any means, right? Of course. Yes.
I can
yes.
still imagine.
And I think, culturally, again,
use and a corporate innovation strategy over who owns it or whether it hurts the current business, etc. Would there not be?
Yeah, and obviously, as kind of, Scott Cook calls it kind of the culture of PowerPoint politics and persuasion, right? Which obviously kind of, we just need to try and make it as principled as possible. And that's really the intent. And from a culture perspective, bringing consumer in the forefront and creating this mindset of little bets, right? Placing small bets, being very clear about what are some of the key assumptions or killer issues, and then creating small experiments against those, that really don't dramatically change anything, but give you the right data points. You let the consumers vote on the idea or the technology that allows you to go from point A to point B. And you do not, and I think that this is really where it becomes very, very important for us to practice what we preach, right, in terms of the culture of experimentation and not getting ahead of ourselves, right? Trying to think about what will happen to this business in 5 years is what gets you into those difficult conversations versus thinking about what do I have now, what do I need to prove to continue working on it, and as my proposition progresses further, I will have all the right pertinent questions and experts to enroll in to figure out what's the next step, what's the next step, what's the next step. Again, it's trying to, and that's really the startup way that we are learning, right? Agility in terms of, startups cannot create a 5-year marketing plan on day one. They don't have the means, they don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that. And how do we bring that same culture to bear within our organization where we are not getting ahead of ourselves?
Chetan, let's practice what we preach, switch gears. Let's be agile because Chiki has a pile-up of questions here. So shoot out a couple of questions and Chetan, give us the fast answer so we can try and address everyone's questions. Chiki, go.
Here you go. Jay Yang wants to know how the process is organized when evaluating external ideas. And Dermot Ryan wants to know when you're conducting those small bets, those small experiments with third parties, is PGV seeking equity investments? Are there any DNA barriers to overcome?
So the first question, how do we evaluate ideas, right? Three core principles. First one is, does this idea or proposition present us with a long-term opportunity to serve the consumer, right? That gets us to the heart of the consumer pain point. Second one, can we do it better than others, right? Again, we are in the business of creating big sustainable brands. This is not about a 2 to 3 year exit, right? And the third one is around, do we see a market that will grow over time? So these three questions, very principally evaluating every lead that comes in based on these three principles, allows us to get to an objective next step. Again, may not be the ultimate answer, but it's the next step. So that's the first answer to the first question. Sorry, JP.
I love it.
You have a comment.
Efficient. Chiki, next one.
The second question is, when conducting the small experiments with third parties, is PGV seeking equity investments?
So there's no one model, right? So the answer is both yes and no. And really the idea is to meet where the startup is, to not only just fund the startup, because, capital in this world is plenty, right? That capital is not the constraint. The constraint is expertise to take the idea from the initial stage to turn that into a sustainable brand. And that's really where understanding what is needed based on where the startup is in its life cycle turns into an individualized discussion. And there are no real guardrails there. So again, it's something that we are learning. We have several different types of agreements and partnerships in place. And this is just one of the many experiments that we're running.
Now, when I did a similar event with Coca-Cola, they said one wonderful effect was that after a while it became known that they're doing Coca-Cola venturing, internal venturing, and actually innovative companies and entrepreneurs came to them. They didn't need to reach out anymore, which was really hard at the beginning. Where are you in the process? I understand you work, for example, with the so-called Venture Engine M13 to help you kind of get into the venture world. Are those quote-unquote crutches, or in which way are those things strategic? And is that the one play, or do you again have a diversity of approaches there?
A great question. So I think, when you start off with taking a world view of what are some of the categories that will emerge over time, where is P&G not playing, and therefore what are some of the areas that we need to start putting anchors on? I think the very next question, once you have that broad investment thesis defined, is creating and mobilizing a scouting network, which we actually have, which is, around what are some of the critical nodes, maybe they are universities, maybe they are organizations, that we need to start creating partnerships with, because JP, to your point, we need to be in the conversation. Because as we know, these ideas, the most obvious conference to go to, 100% guaranteed you will not find what you're looking for. It's at the intersection of some of those conversations where, through serendipity, you create contacts, you build your network, and over time, ideas come through anywhere, and we need to be open to ideas coming from anywhere. So it's a very deliberate attempt at creating what we call as our search briefs and floating them out. You can see them on our website, exactly what our investment thesis is. And then beyond that, very deliberately creating a scouting network to help execute against that, to then create, and these conversations like these that we are having, right, are incredibly helpful as well to drive awareness. And it's all about mental availability, right? Making people understand that we are open for business and here are the areas that we are interested in. Come talk to us. In a lot of instances, there's a perception that, oh, it's Procter & Gamble, you know, what would they want to do with a startup? And how do I approach them? And hopefully some of these things actually lower the barriers to saying, hey, you know what? It doesn't hurt. Pick up the phone. Let's have a conversation, because you never know where it leads to.
Right, right. And I know there's another collaboration that Chiki was very interested in. You're working with the Vineta project. Chiki, can you tell us a bit about that and ask the question?
Sure. And I also have some great questions from the studio. Let me, while I look for that, Vineta project, which I believe has to do with you're investing in women's ventures. Yep. So let's talk about that first. And then some people are asking, how big is a small bet for P&G?
Yeah. So first one, Vineta project, and I'll also touch upon M13, JP. I remember you asked that in the previous round. So let me set the framework, right? So when you're trying to create a business, broadly it goes through three phases. You have the create phase, you have the build phase, and then you have the scale phase. You know, obviously P&G is really good at the scaling phase, right? It's like you have the contraption, all you have to do is plug it into the machine, and we know how to do that. We are actually pretty good at creating partnerships and leveraging internal technologies on the create phase. I think, you know, many of the experiments that we are running are in both create and build. And build is where partners like M13 comes into play. And they are one of the many experiments, again, that we are running, where we say we have an idea that, you know, we have two, for example, right now. One is in the area of menopause, and the other one is in the area of Bodewell. Those are two brands that are actually on the market that are currently being incubated by M13 in what we call as the build phase, right? Where they take the idea that was developed internally with collaboration from external startups, and you bring it to a certain level, and at that point in time, what is the right way to take it to the next level to get it ready for scaling? And in that experiment, or in that phase, what is the role of an external partner? That's the question that partnerships like M13 help answer. Okay. Mm-hmm. And when you go back to the create phase, and in terms of, you know, creating all these different scouting networks and being in the conversation, you know, the fact that women entrepreneurs are significantly underserved, you know, I forget the stat, you know, I think 2018, some 2% of all the venture funding went to women entrepreneurs, despite the fact that, you know, some 2/3 of ventures that were founded by women were found to be more successful than those founded by men. Again, right, so when you listen to those types of statistics, you're like, okay,
of P&G's product gets sold to women.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So in that context, and we understand, you know, the women consumer, right, based, JP, what you just said. So in that context, why not partner with somebody like Vineta, who are very intentionally tapping into all of the amazing ideas that women entrepreneurs are bringing to the table to, again, figure out, are there opportunities? And this is also an area where, honestly, it's been very heartening to see company like P&G step up to say that, you know what, many of these areas or many of these ideas, we may, as a company, never invest in those. However, how can we bring our expertise to table to actually help some of the entrepreneurs think through? So many of us on the leadership team in P&G Ventures mentor one or more of startups within Vineta project, depending on whatever phase that they are in, whatever questions we have.
Follow-up, JP, if I may, because you haven't answered my question. How big is a small bet for PGV, right? People are asking, how, you know, can you give us a quantity?
Yeah. So I think I will use a dating analogy here. It's because the short answer is there is no right answer and there is no right size. Because, we also get this question, are you interested in pre-seed, seed, series A, what are we talking about? And honestly, the answer is all of the above. And the reason why it's all of the above and how we operate with startups is, again, if it fits our investment thesis, if there is something of interest that we believe merits a little bit more of a double clicking, we create what we call as low resolution consumer experiments, right? Get their product, get their idea, put it in front of, 5 consumers, with all of our consumer insights and products research expertise that we as company bring to the table, and start building a gut on, would this actually help resolve a credible pain? Is this a big enough idea? Is it a long-term opportunity? Some of the questions that I mentioned earlier or early on, to jointly build our gut on, do we want to go to the next date? And do we want to go to the next date? And again, we gate it very specifically so that we are not exposing ourselves or the company to any confidential information, because we don't actually need to know any confidential information. I just want to know the consumer's reaction to the idea. And that can be done by giving the product to 5 consumers, or setting up a landing page and creating some very simple communication to see, does anyone even care about this idea, before we even go to the how many people care about this idea, right? So again, kind of stage gating it in this very structured way allows you to build your gut. And at that point in time, honestly, the size of bet becomes immaterial, because you're building your conviction, and as long as you're bringing both the parties along on the table, then you figure out, is there a path forward? And then what it takes from a funding perspective or help perspective. Because remember, it's more than just funding. Like, we are not just in the business of writing you a check and then stepping back. It's more about staying engaged and bringing complementary resources. There are startups that need manufacturing resources and supply chain resources that we as a company can, again, borrow from the mothership and bring to the table in a beautiful way,
now,
right, to help
Janet,
the startup progress.
Janet is our economist, so I'm sure she wants to follow up on the metrics. You've talked debt, but that's just one of them. Janet, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, JP. So Chetan, obviously this venture capital for innovation, this is very complex, and it's a very long process too. How do you measure it from the very beginning to the end? And even at the very beginning, you have to think about what's the outcome I want to reach. So how do you measure the potential outcome or results? How do you measure the inputs? And how do you measure the throughputs?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I think the way to think about it is, first you have to set the grand vision, right? And then what you have to do is you have to chunk your work into small pieces, right? And we have different phases, and we make the projects and the project teams that are working on it go through those different phases. So not very dissimilar to the external world at all. We have, finite resources. We have both from a monetary and people perspective and mental bandwidth perspective, obviously. And we have internal teams who are passionate about specific areas or tasked to work on specific areas like aging, for example, or women's health, for example. When they find interesting technologies, they create internal pitches. They create internal pitches that really need to, because, obviously there's funding that requests that come along with each one of those pitches, and they are fighting for finite resources, right? So, connecting this back to the culture conversation that we were having, we do have to create this urgency, this productive paranoia inside our own organization, because let's face it, we are never going to be a startup. We are a $72 billion company, right? So, however, what can we learn from the way in which startups operate? What can we learn from the VC community and marry that with some of our own internal processes and best practices to create new experiments? So going to your question in terms of measures, we have specific pitches and we have specific graduations and specific criteria that we expect the teams to meet before we take them to the next level. And some of the measurements have to be around in-process measurements, right? Because to your point, the end goal is some ways out, and it would not be productive to engage in a discussion on exactly what that measure has to be. Of course, there is a sense of what that measure has to be. And of course, there's some certain commitments, just like any other business units, that we as PGV have to make to the P&G company in terms of the number of projects that we'll deliver, etc. But we control everything in between, and how do you smartly chunk it out to create a sense of progress, to create a sense of productive paranoia? Not an easy question.
Oh, can I follow up from that?
We'll have another fast question answer session here, because they're piling up again. Even if you don't have the answers, just shoot something. Just try it. Okay, yeah. Tiki, go.
I think Janet wanted to do one quick follow-up question, and then I've got like 3 questions from our audience.
Oh, thank you, Tiki. So my follow-up question is, if you actually do not have a fixed set of metrics, when you communicate internally, when you persuade your coworkers that I am doing a great job with projects which will bring us profit 5 years ahead of time, how do you persuade them? Are you using stories, using visions?
Good question.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question, and again, it's totally a work in progress, because you're exactly right. Is how do you measure and communicate the sense of progress, and that's where having some of these finite intermittent gates in between actually helps create a sense of progress. And what we are realizing is that there is a tremendous sense of accomplishment that comes with partnering, whether it's internal, because we have projects that use internal technologies that come from our amazing corporate R&D group, as well as many of the startups that we are working with, to say how do we in a very disciplined way move the project further, and how do we celebrate not only the fact that projects are moving forward, but failures, because as you know, we are in the high risk, high reward world, right, where many projects get killed constantly. How do we learn from it? How do we create a brain trust, women's wellness as an area, right? There are several projects that have come and gone. However, what's consistent is learning to fine tune where we want to play and what the consumer pain point is, and what would it take to create a breakthrough in that world that helps evaluate the next lead and the next lead and the next lead, or opens up access to new networks. So I think that again there is a hard metric aspect to it, but a lot of it, because we've been around for less than 5 years right now, as of today, right? So there's also a lot of soft metrics that you have to create around motivation, around rewards, around what constitutes success, and what is the right culture that you want to create in order to execute against the vision.
Well, let me pick up on that, because we do have a question from our audience about just that. So quick answers. Luis Kelly wants to know, is the goal of P&G Ventures to build billion-dollar brands, or to help the company start to transition to a broader portfolio of brands, or both? Okay, that was a quick.
Both. It's diversifying the portfolio into categories.
So then how is PGV resourced, right? And how do you manage the pipeline of opportunities and the ebb and flow? How many concurrent projects can you effectively manage with your team right now?
We are learning that as we speak. So I think first, the fact that we are entering new categories, the fact that we are looking at emerging technologies in many instances, means that there will be many failures, which means we need to play the numbers game, because it turns into probability, right? There are just some projects that are going to drop off at various stages. So we need to have the innovation funnel, if you will, filled with a certain number of projects at any given point in time. So that is one perspective. And so right now, I would say we have about a dozen projects in the mix. And it's amazing actually to see the creative destruction, right? Where you are working and getting passionate about an area, and out of nowhere comes a very interesting lead that gets you to question what you're working on. And then really it's a great problem to have, to say, okay, how do we make sense of these two things, and where do we want to prioritize? Because again, resources are finite and you cannot be working on, so what's the right way to pace is something that we are learning every day. And I would say, about a dozen projects at any given point in
I have a
time
quick
are
question.
active.
Just having gone through acquisition and divestiture at P&G myself, we've bought previously many small companies, DDF, Sir, Bekai, you can list them, or medium-sized ones, IAMS, etc. We've also created things like Reflect.com, etc. It seems to me that currently we're buying other brands like the natural deodorant brand, I forgot its name, or Bevel and others. Is it, Native? It seems to me like a little bit of buy, divest, buy, divest, buy, divest. Is that a given, or is that unintended? We just need to improve our hitting rate?
So first of all, I love that you referred to P&G as we, proving the fact that you might not be at P&G, but you're always a part of P&G. So I love that. So A+ on that, JP. And secondly, look, I believe we have an amazing strategy in place, and I think that cascades down to every business unit in terms of thinking about where is the category going from trends and from a consumer's perspective, and really every category has independent reins to really think through what should its divestiture and or acquisition strategy be. So I will not comment on it because that's way far outside the ventures land. But certainly from a ventures perspective, again, this turns into a very interesting opportunity where you can have experiments on technologies that are 3 years out because it requires a lot of development work. And at the same time, you can have a startup that already has a product in the marketplace. How can we take that to expand the shoulders of that particular brand, whether it's from a technology perspective, communications perspective, branding perspective, distribution perspective, whatever that perspective is, to actually have those very extreme experiments running at the same time under the same roof. Because it really, outside of obviously the business potential that can come out of it, it creates some very interesting learning that, again, I see it as my responsibility, our responsibility as ventures organization to socialize across the broader P&G organization. And having said that, there's also a ventures-like effort underway in every single business unit where, again, within the framework of how they define their own category and the businesses that they want to be in, they are interacting with startups. They are looking at the next generation of technologies that would propel their business to that next growth curve or whatever their metrics are. So I think those are two very interesting complementary experiments happening inside a big company,
cool.
Which is really
more questions from the audience.
Yeah, lots where you're getting a lot of questions. Dermot Bryan wants to know, in the 5 years of PGV, is there a marquee success story that shows how the model works? Any home runs you can share with us? Which is?
$1 billion brand.
No, I know.
That's what success would look like.
Which is the one, you've been around for 5 years, which is the one that you can share with us that you say it's in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. So we have 4 in the market right now. The first one is Zevo, which is in the area of natural insect control. The second one is Opte Skincare, which is a precision skincare device, for blemishes and hyperpigmentation. It's a pretty cool idea. Check out opteskin.com if you get the chance to look at the technology. The third one is Bodwell, which is in the area of menopause. And the fourth one, no, I messed it up. Bodwell, which is in the area of medicated skin. and then Kindra, which is in the area of menopause. So we have these four seedlings that are in the market that are undergoing kind of the ultimate trial by fire product market fit work that is happening right now, right? So there's clearly a lot of conviction that we have built around progressing those brands to the stage where we are comfortable putting it out in the world for real life transactions and beyond. Zevo is actually in Target, it's in Home Depots, it's actually gaining distribution rapidly. So you should see it on your neighborhood brick and mortar soon, if not already. So that again demonstrates the company's confidence in its ability to turn into a big brand. So those are the four that are out there, public facing. And then as I said, we have a dozen experiments that are kind of behind the curtains that are currently being worked. So hopefully in the coming months and years,
has the pandemic made you pivot on a few products that you are working on? How has consumer behavior post-pandemic affect what you might be looking at or launching?
Yeah. I think it's very interesting, and this is honestly a huge kudos to some of the upfront work that the team had done in terms of understanding and identifying some of the macro shifts and some of what we are seeing, right, in terms of increased need for striking a balance between, nature and chemical, the different roles that your home is forced to take. Now it's your daycare and your kitchen and your all your entire world is in your home. So how can you create this hyper versatile home, as we call it? Some of those trends that we had already started to see emerge is being accelerated and given a whole new meaning and color, if you will, because of where we are on COVID. So fortunately, it doesn't fundamentally actually change our investment thesis. It just adds further fuel to our conviction behind many of those. And P&G as a company, we are in your home. We are in the health and hygiene business, whether it's your clothes or your dishes or your body. And I think, how do we combine all of the expertise that we have gathered as a consequence in the service of some of these new and emerging needs that are coming up? So I think it creates several very interesting playgrounds for us to poke at to see is there anything interesting.
Excellent. I'll let Janet ask some more viewer questions. I had one quick one, again, a little bit from my insider wandering perspective. I mean, just a few years ago, our conversation here would have been rare, if not impossible, and you would have been fired probably, because P&G did not discuss things of strategy, particularly long-term, particularly, how they look at portfolio, measuring success, what's next, etc. So to some extent, obviously, you feel a compelling need to open up and talk about these things and also have more people participating in the conversation versus just maybe the CEO and the CFO classically only 5 or maybe 10 years ago. What are those drivers? How do you manage it? And how do you balance? Because I know there's still limits. And I poked on one of them just earlier in my portfolio question. How do you manage that balance? How do you open up? How do you decide?
Yeah, I think it's just us. First of all, it's an artifact of us creating new categories, right? So we don't know what we don't know, and it almost forces us to go outside to learn, to immerse ourselves into an aspect of the consumer's life that we as a company have very little understanding of. So that's the first push to go external behind this. I think the second one is around the fact that, and the realization rather, that while some of these insights and some of these pain points could be very obvious, the trick is not about coming up with an idea. The trick is, and the real money and the potential is, how do you convert that idea into a business? How do you execute that? And kind of all the steps that you have to go through in order to go from A to B and what it takes. So the fact that I'm interested in aging, it would be a disservice to my group and to P&G if I held that back from the world, because I'm interested in learning more about what's happening in age tech. What are some of the new and cool things coming out? Because I know that the buck is not going to stop there. The buck is going to stop when you convert some of those ideas into big brands, into big businesses that actually profoundly change the consumer's life for the better, right? So I think again, it's the how that we believe is where the secret sauce comes in, and that's where we are hoping again that we can bring the assets and expertise to the table. The what, I can discuss that all day long. I'm not worried as much about, or we are not worried as much about the confidentiality. In fact, all of our search briefs are on our website, pgventurestudio.com. You can go and look at, and we describe, even within aging, you will see the 6 to 7 different specific areas that we are looking at, because again, it's a new world. This is kind of where, 1 + 1 = 3 type of an equation, right, that we want to help write as an organization. So I think that's really the push behind us saying, you know what, let's get out there, let's talk, and let's see what's possible.
You also had,
I
read about the innovation challenge at the Consumer Electronics Show and so on and so on. So even that is turned public. Janet, you have questions piling up as well. Shoot, tell us the most exciting one.
Yeah. Thank you. My question is actually related to a question from our audience. Jay Yan asked, how does the transfer to core business work? So my question is actually that when you find out your venture business is successful and you produced a successful new product, how do you persuade your the existing business units to adopt the new product? Or do you set the new product as a separate entity that's away from the existing business units?
That would be a great problem to have. And that's really our job, right? So as these businesses that are out there already in the market, and the next cohort and the cohort behind that we hope to bring to the market soon, that's the conviction that we have to build by demonstrating the business potential, by demonstrating the product market fit, by demonstrating the fact that the proposition that we have built actually helps resolve a big consumer pain point, and that there will be growth in the coming decades. And if I can prove that, I think, again, I'm creating a good problem for the company. I'm forcing them to say no to it versus trying to think about how am I going to integrate. Honestly, we don't know, right? And there are some great discussions happening internally, but again, the proof is in the pudding. Right, and that's our job, is to not worry about that and instead focus on creating such compelling propositions that we create these wonderful headaches for the company to say, how do you want to integrate?
Just one thought here I can chip in. In our conversation, when I had a conversation with Coca-Cola, and Derek van Remsburg was the president at that time, they had a budget. They had a budget to acquire new ideas, to seed new ideas, and then they literally, when they assessed that the idea was ready to be moved to a business unit, and the measure there was, would it fit the distribution, or would it mislead the Coke truck to go to distribution places that would not fit the round and not be scalable?
Yeah.
Once they decided we're scaled enough, they literally sold the business to the business unit, and thus got fresh funds to acquire and seed more ideas, acquire other businesses. So interesting model there to look at. Janet, shoot, next question.
No, I think that's great. And very quickly, if I may, to connect it back to one of the original questions around the history of P&G Ventures, is precisely that. There are some ideas that if incubated and kind of nurtured the right way, can turn into big businesses, but they have to go through this maturing phase where some of the hurdle rates that they are able to demonstrate would fall well below anything that big businesses and brands within P&G would ever want to invest in. So how do you create a place that gives it the space to actually incubate these small ideas, to assess their potential and bring them to the level where it can demonstrate the ability to compete with the big brands, right? And once you've demonstrated that potential, then you can then take the next step to figure out what you want to do with it. And I think, JP, some of the examples that you're talking about, I'm sure we'll be discussing that, if not already, in terms of potential exits.
And the other thing is it continues after you move it to the business units, because often you create a unique venture It has a unique culture, a unique way of marketing, a unique way of being distributed, a new platform for selling. You need to make sure, we call it, in our research on Uber brands, we call it ring fencing. You need to make sure that you ring fence and you protect very important parts of that DNA in order for them not to be scaled and standardized away, because then you're actually destroying the value you just brought in.
Absolutely.
Jeff, go ahead.
Absolutely.
JP, there's a couple questions along those lines from our audience, and I think we haven't quite answered it completely. JP was alluding it to right now. Chip Walter wants to know, how do you overcome the cultural antibodies that believe that they know the customer? Now we're talking about your business unit people who are also developing new ideas, right? How do you convince them not to destroy your baby?
Yeah, I think it goes back to being very careful about defining the playgrounds, right? So you've defined your playgrounds, that's number one. And number two, to have the ongoing dialogue at the top-to-top level so that we are driving transparency on some of the areas of interest from a business unit perspective, some of the new and interesting things that we are seeing from ventures perspective, to again try to make sure that we are removing some of those potential barriers, and we are foreseeing and removing some of those barriers so that teams don't run into those barriers and that they can go out there and execute, right? So again, we are in this learning process, but I think it's one of those very critical aspects that we have to be extremely careful of to make sure that we are defining and separating the playground.
I think it's a very important question for the listener who asked that question. We did some research. You can look it up on Uber Brands. That's spelled with a UE, uberbrands.com. If you just Google or search for ring fencing within that, you will find case studies, including the one from Coca-Cola. But it is a big challenge because, as I also alluded to with previous P&G acquisitions, you buy something and you buy it because it's so different, but then you have this tendency of wanting to apply your standards, your procedures, your scaling to it. Now, to a lot of extent, that makes sense because the scaling is what drives the profit, what drives a lot of the future growth, but at the same time, it always bears the risk of destroying it. So I would recommend you look that up. It's an exciting area. Back to you,
Chetan?
Go ahead, Janet.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
Hi, Chetan. Because you will be working with a very broad group of people when you are doing venture capital. Sounds like you need an internal team of experts. So my question is, what is the composition of your internal team of experts?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question because, you are exactly right. As these new technologies and our ideas come in, obviously you need the right technology expertise, right, to be able to ask the questions. As we start talking about, what aspect of that technology is superior, is ownable, you need, intellectual property expertise, for example, connecting that with, does it actually help address a consumer need? You are suddenly looking at market insights expertise, right? As you think about go-to-market and creating, small-scale consumer experiments, you are suddenly talking about, low-level but performance marketing and marketing expertise that you need to bring to the table. As you think about startups that are slightly more advanced and might actually need to start diving into some of the supply chain aspects of it, they need supply chain expertise. So I think what Lee Radford, my manager, what she's done a masterful job of really is creating this core team of leaders who represent some of those key functions, who actually have a diversity of experiences that they bring to the table so that we can ask those questions, we can design some of what has to be true early on. So you need to, you start with that core set of expertise and leaders in each one of those functions as part of the leadership team. And then obviously you let some of the projects and the areas and some of the needs that you have dictate incremental staffing, number one. And number two, we are not averse to seeking external expertise. We are getting into areas where, yes, we as P&G bring a certain level of expertise. But if we complemented that with an expert in that field, for example, we could take that to the next level and fast forward some of our learning dramatically. So it's a constant evolution, but you know, if we are successful,
all right, I think we have time for one more question. So which one is the most compelling one, Chiki or Janet?
There's one here from Michelle Park that says the VC versus P&G CPG risk-reward profile is pretty different. Does P&G Ventures operate independently as more traditional VC structure, or how does the leadership reconcile the fiduciary duty to the more traditional P&G shareholders?
Yeah, so I think in order for any venturing enterprise like ours to succeed, it needs to have a direct line of sight to the CEO and the board and their sponsorship, and that's exactly how PGV is designed, and that's all of the work that, again, Lee kind of set into motion at the very inception to make sure that we were set up to succeed in this particular context. From that, so that's number one. Number two, yes, we are obviously different from a VC, where again we bring more than just capital. Our intent is partnering together to create brands, right, that are sustained over time, which automatically, by very definition of what I just said, it expands the time horizons that we are looking at, and our definition of exit is obviously very different from that of a VC. So I think there are some significant differences, and again, it's an interesting model. It's what is the role of a strategic investor who is truly looking at identifying and nurturing superior technologies that get to the heart of consumer pain point and where the consumption is going to come from in coming decades? And how do we do that in this new world? I think is really the grand experiment.
Wonderful timing, because that's about all the time we have.
That we are running.
Chetan, thanks so much for spilling the beans for us here. This is a rare moment. People will be intrigued now. Some might want to, submit their own ideas. Others will want to figure out what you're doing. What's the one place they should go to that leads to all the answers, or hopefully most of them? In one word?
I think it's our website. It's really pgventuresstudio.com, where again you can read about the profiles of some of our existing businesses, and have all the ways to get in touch with us, even submit ideas. Actually, we have a portal there where you can really link in to submit your proposal if you have an exciting idea. So I think that's the one place, and of course you can connect with
all right,
me
excellent.
or
I suppose
anyone
that
of us
Ventures Studios in one word,
LinkedIn, Twitters of the world.
We'll figure it out. In the age of Google, everything is find-outable. And you, dear participants, thank you all so much for participating, getting your credit, asking so many questions. You find here a slide of a lot of other exciting webcasts and other programs coming up. Don't forget our podcast either. You have some on diversity in the workplace. You have some how to cope with the COVID crisis, particularly as a CMO. So interesting stuff there. And then finally, I want to thank everyone on the call here for sticking it out and looking at my beautiful background all this time and longing to be there. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks a lot for participating.
Thank you, Jim.